Okay. Yeah, so here we are from Everett with our little piece of the day. I'm here with Corey Wilder as well, who works with me at the Murrow College. And we're going to talk, or just introduce the topic of open education resources. And we've got some really fantastic experts who frankly know it more than I. I have a very specific perspective that I'll open with, and then I'm going to toss it to what I think are really the experts on this. So obviously Paul and Mike, both in Vancouver, and then Rebecca too, you as well in Pullman, have some experience with this, with your work on the various initiatives across the campus. So I'll just throw in my perspective to open it up, and then, like I said, I have no slides to share. But this is a topic that I'm greatly interested in as a faculty member who deals with students, the population we serve in Everett. Not to stereotype, but certainly we see non-traditional students and students who are extremely budget conscious. And when we talk about something that is, a $10 or $15 purchase even, that's a substantial purchase for some of our students. We've actually had that level of conversation about money. And so when it comes to things that can save our students money and get them a quality education but maybe trim the cost for them, such as some of these OER related initiatives, that's something I took great interest in. I know Corey as well, we were just talking about this, and I was sharing with her some of the things that I've learned in this journey. So we'll learn in this hour about some of the specific WSU offerings and the history of it. But let me just start off with a couple of high-level facts. You may hear others jump in on this as well. So basically, if you don't, I'm sure most people here know already what OER is, Open Education Resources. Part of that is things like textbooks that are open education resources. So they're free, often peer-reviewed books that are openly licensed and available. There are some variations on that depending on which platforms are out there. We'll, I'm sure, hear about that this hour. We also know, of course, across all campuses, not just Everett, that there's financial struggles that our students are facing often, and they're very cost conscious. So anything that we can do to help them is welcomed. There was actually a working group on that very topic that Rebecca, I, and others were part of. You'll hear a little bit about that this hour. Looking at some of the data that was pulled from that report, again, I'll just pull a couple of factoids that I thought lead this conversation quite well. And one is that things like the costs have been rising for textbooks so high at more of a 3 times the rate of inflation since 1977, so just proportionally going up in costs. I saw a statistic that said, I think it was cited from an NBC News report, that about $1,225 yearly was spent on books and supplies by students annually, which is a lot of money on top of tuition. Some students are turning to things like rentals and other alternatives. We as instructors have to be aware of the impact that this has on our students. I've even saw a statistic that mentioned that 2 out of 3 students in some cases will skip a book entirely simply because they can't afford it, despite the fact that it might be required at some time in their academic life. So that's a concern which sort of frames the discussion as to why this is worth looking at. Now, with that said, there are fans and detractors of this. I will tell you just my own journey to where I'm at now, and that's kind of what I bring to this table, or to this conversation uniquely. I'm somebody who loves technology, so I'm not afraid to look outside the box. So I'm definitely a prime candidate as a faculty member who has, in the past, has not used OER, that is now about to start using this selectively in my classes. I frankly just haven't paid a lot of attention to it. I do recall about 4 or 5 years ago hearing about it, as you hear, as we all look to expand our tool sets as teachers. The first exposure I had to an OER series of textbooks was substandard. I was not impressed, and I didn't like it. In fact, I remember it was a Wikibooks type site, which was just frankly a lot of stuff. The idea was great, but the implementation at that time wasn't so great. So I formed a very snap judgment based on a very quick assessment that made me sort of sour to the idea of OER. Where that's turned around, though, is looking at what's happened in the last few years and the movement and and the progression of brain trust that's come in to make these better. And there's actually some organized initiatives that have made the quality and the caliber of this much better. There's also a broader selection across topics. I've still noted, in my assessment at least, there's a heavy amount in the STEM-related areas, and I'm in the Murrow College, so for me, communication books, even now, I'm still struggling to find a lot of them, but I have found some. In fact, what I have looked at, the quality of it's much better knowing that it's peer reviewed is valuable to me, but it has to fit for what my learning objectives are. And as an example of how specifically I'm going to use this, again, somebody who's a new convert to this idea, for anyone who's in the audience who may be on the fence about it or not aware of it, the first thing that I found was an example of a book under, let's see, it was under the Open Textbook Library, where it's a book that it takes a very specific niche or area within my broader discipline that now allows me to have a free additional resource to supplement what I'm already doing. So I have my existing book, but I've also found another book that I might have been on the fence about bringing in because of the cost it would incur, but now I can do so and cherry pick from it because it supplements specific, or deals with specific topics in the curriculum. So for an example, there's a book in writing and being aware of copyright issues, and it's a very narrow focus. There's no way for this particular course that I'm going to use this for that would be the only book that I would use in a paid equivalent, but it's now something that's an additional resource. So that's one way that I'm going to use this. I've also found a book in an integrated strategic communication program that actually I've been looking through and was actually pleasantly surprised that the quality of it was at the level that made it a real competitor for the more expensive, I mean $100 plus major publisher book equivalent. So I found some real evolution in terms of the caliber and quality of this, and obviously this isn't going to be for everybody. For me, I'm not going to be using them in all of my classes. It doesn't, the quality isn't out there for every book equivalent, but there are some. And I think it just requires people to be aware of what those are and to take advantage of some of the WSU initiatives that you're about to hear about, so that you can get connected to and review these for yourselves. So with that said, I'll toss it over. I don't know, Mike, if you want to go up next to take it from there.
Yeah, sure. I can get around this table. Probably not. All right, Paul's going to talk about some of the stuff we're doing here at WSU Vancouver. I thought I might give an overview of open educational resources and open pedagogy. I'm still trying to find the right presentation for people here at WSU. I have found, though, that a lot of people, I think, tend to see this as quite a recent thing. It has a long history, and so I just like to go over some of that history. Partially just to show how this has evolved over time, and if you maybe dropped in to this whole process 8 years ago, it may look completely different than it did when you last looked at it. So I thought I'd start by just telling you my experience and how I got into open educational materials. It was actually back at the dawn of the web. I was working with College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at NIU. And we had built a website, and the last thing that we wanted to do was ask ourselves, how can we use this website for teaching, right? It was 1996, so no one knew how, right? Which was kind of a blessing in some way. We came up with this idea that we were going to have students write and publish original work on the web, and so we created this thing called the Persona Project, and it was a dictionary of biography on the web where students would, in their composition class, if they wanted extra credit is sort of the, sort of the WD-40 of the educational world. And so if they wanted extra credit, they could go up and they could write for extra credit a short biography. And it would be meaningful and be for a real audience. And the idea was that the students would take that seriously. And it wasn't a huge success. I left there shortly afterwards and learned some things about institutional culture that I'm still learning today. And what survives and what doesn't. But the students that did do this did take it really seriously because they had a sense of audience and they had a sense that this was real work. And so this sort of thing here where students publish real work on the web, publish their own educational materials, their own explanations, we often call this open pedagogy or sometimes OEP, just because we love acronyms. And so we're going to come back to this, but the birth of OER initially comes out of this idea of getting students to do real, meaningful work in the classroom for an authentic audience, right? I'll skip over this. I worked in some other projects for a while. I eventually ended up in 2008. I ended up working for MIT in the Open Courseware project. This project was launched in 2002, and initially the idea was that MIT was going to take all the materials, all the lecture notes, all the lectures, all that. I apologize to this audience here. I have to kind of look at that camera so that I'm not, I don't know. I'm not particularly good. I haven't got the whole eye contact thing down. The idea with the MIT OpenCourseWare project was MIT had all these materials. They could share them for free, and then somehow magically, everybody could reuse those in their courses. So I have 2008 there because that's when I went to work for them. But really, we started this in 2002. The site was launched 2001. It was initiated, and there was a lot of hard work that was done trying to get these materials reused in other people's classes. And what we realized from that process, right around when I came in to that process, was that the materials just were not very reusable. They were sort of what we call the classroom exhaust of an MIT course, right? They're sort of like the leftovers of the meal that the students at MIT had, but they weren't, you have a PDF of lecture notes. Well, you can't change that. It's got MIT all over it. It's got the professor's name, their voice, and so forth. And students just, the reuse of these materials just was not, it was not easy. And so around 2008, we began to shift the focus away from what we called courseware, these sorts of collections of content, to open textbooks. And 2011 is when I think we got really serious about this. A company called OpenStax came out and decided to produce peer-reviewed textbooks that look and feel and act like textbooks. And you can get the digital copies for free, but if you want the print copies, they're available essentially at cost. And they've produced a wide variety of these in introductory classes. And there was just a huge demand that this revealed, that people had been waiting for a textbook that was a decent quality, peer-reviewed textbook that they could swap into the class. These particularly took off at the community colleges because of some of the price sensitivities of the students. But what we found in the last 4 years is that even though we don't believe, many of us don't believe that our students are price sensitive, our students are very price sensitive. One of the things that we know from research is that no matter how much students are paying currently for college, increasing their cost of attendance by $1,000 a year more has a predictive effect on whether they'll drop out or not. And I think for middle class students, I think $1,000 increases it by, I might be remembering this wrong, but by like 15%. You increase the tuition by 15%, the total cost of attendance by 15%. 15% more likely the students will drop out. And that's partially because even though we think, well, it's a drop in the bucket, for these students, what's a textbook here and a textbook there? They're already paying so much. At some point, the bucket is full, right? At some point, there's no more that bucket can hold, and the students back off of that, or drop out, or various other not so good outcomes. So these revealed a huge demand, both at the community colleges and more recently at the 4 years. 2013, one of the things that was the early promise of open text, open resources, was the idea that faculty could go in and they could edit them and could add their own material and customize them for their own students. And in 2013, a company named Lumen Learning came about. There's been some other companies since then that have followed this model, the idea that, okay, well, you're going to get the materials for free, but we'll provide some architecture around this that allows you to customize these materials. Now, if you look at this particular, example here, this is a student success textbook. And if you think about a student success textbook that has a whole bunch of students on a campus that doesn't look familiar to you, think of how that feels as a student. So what this has is on any given page of this textbook, you have your own copy of the website. You can go in, you can swap out that content that has all the generic pictures of the students looking, looking pensive, and replace it with your own students in your own campus. And you can give them information about, here's where you go to the quantitative, resources center on your own campus. Here's the specific information. It can go right there in the textbook. That's particularly useful on a student success textbook. But what I think you'll find is it's also useful in editing some of your own materials. You know your students. You know why they're in your program. You know what might resonate with your students. There's also still some open education, open pedagogy things going on. There's this ANT 101 course, which is fascinating. I'd love to talk to people about it, but I take like the whole hour here. This is from Michael Wesch. You may have seen some of his videos before. If I showed you his videos from about 5-6 years ago, you'd recognize them. He does one called "If These Walls Could Talk," where students do research on themselves as anthropologists and present it in this very moving YouTube video. He's broken down his class into 10 big lessons of anthropology, and the neat thing he's done is he's made it all. There's no textbook. He's put together a mishmash of Radiolab stuff, some material that he's written himself, and some open material, and then all the people in the course have these challenges, right? So there's 10 challenges, one for each week. Week 4 or something, the challenge is get uncomfortable. And the idea is that you are going to go into an uncomfortable situation as an anthropologist. You're going to analyze the reasons for your discomfort, and what biases you may have, and then do something called thick description, which I guess is an anthropological technique. And the students go and they do it. And the students create these materials that are also kind of teaching the other students in the class. My favorite one is this one here, where some guy goes to a woman's wine tasting weekend and writes about his uncomfortability with that, and glamping at the Lake of the Ozarks, right? So the students can create some of these materials too with you. It doesn't have to be only the instructor. And just as an example of this is something we're looking at for next year, but maybe something that's a little easier to do. The idea of a textbook that has just regular text, but if you look down here, insights and perspectives, the idea that students could write original pieces for that help explain some of the dense text with examples, right? So, you put students in groups and they come up with ways to talk about mitosis. And why mitosis is important. And I think that this is really the new frontier of open educational resources and open pedagogy, is where those two things come together, and you have instructor-created resources and instructor-modified resources being supplemented by student work where they teach each other. So that's my presentation. And I'd love feedback on it, because we're still trying to figure out what the most helpful presentation is. I guess one thing I would just say about this is, again, the area is vast, and there's so many places that you can find there's so many places for instructors in this. And I think sometimes people see one instructor working with open materials, and they see the way that their class works, and they say, well, that's not my kind of thing. But it really is an open field. And so you get people that just want to swap in a textbook, and you get other people that want to make, a massively open anthropology course where students do open anthropological work. So there's really a place for everybody, and it's just finding your place in the spectrum. And so I hope if you walk away from this with anything, you walk away with that idea that there's not one way to do this, that it's actually quite a broad field.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah. Yeah, just why don't you go up and, yeah. Is that okay? Or should I wait for a question? Let's go.
All right. So I feel bad because I don't have any slides.
Oh, hit stop sharing.
Stop sharing, stop sharing.
Yeah. Up on the...
That just means you have to
Got
do
it.
song and dance, Paul.
Well, that was my plan the
Or
whole
at least
time.
tell jokes.
That's what math people do, is they do song and dance. So, I think I was asked here for the most part because we've tried to be fairly active in the use of OER resources in the math department here on the Vancouver campus. And so I was just going to explain a little bit about what we're doing and maybe some of the hows that we're doing as well. Because I think there are some issues with trying to get that adopted into the curriculum, essentially. So I'm going to split this a little bit into two categories because we use open educational resources for some upper division courses, and those upper division courses actually next semester will have at least 2 that are using it. So Math 301 and Math 320. In both cases, those are textbooks that reverted to the copyright reverted to the author, and they decided to make it public. In both of those cases, there have been extra efforts post the author getting that copyright back to create other resources. So in Math 301, which is Introduction to Mathematical Reasoning, somebody has made an entire lecture series and posted those videos for every single section because they did it while they were using their book. And so you have a chance to actually incorporate those extra materials into your class as well. So a lot of those resources come with extras that are available, and those are also things that come with published textbooks, published and that students buy. But because of either the extra cost or the difficulty of accessing those, they don't get used. And so we often have textbooks that have included in the price some extra packages, but we don't incorporate them. Because these are more easily accessed, it's easier to incorporate it, or it can be optional, right? So on the other side, and this is where we put a little bit more focus, is around some of the 100 level introductory math classes. And if you think about, math has this maybe a special place in all of this, because if a student comes into the university and wants to go into a STEM field, they're going to end up in either, is there a question?
I think that was just your.
Is that my echo back? They're going to end up in calculus. Calculus for engineers, calculus for biology, something like that, right? There's a long line of math courses that they may have to take. Let's say if they start all the way in Math 100 to 103 to 106 to 108, that's our train here at Washington State. That's 4 classes. 4 classes and 4 textbooks that we would ask students to purchase, and that's just to arrive at the starting point of their math sequence, where then we're going to ask them to purchase textbooks to get them through the rest of their calculus sequence. And so that's quite a lot extra to ask somebody to take on to come and major in a STEM field if that is where they're starting. Another issue that often comes up when Mike addressed affordability, I certainly have students, and I know other instructors have students who will never end up with the textbook. They'll use their cell phone and take pictures of it. They'll take pictures of the problem sets. They won't have access to the full textbook. They won't have access to it when they need it. You know, if they miss something, they miss it, right? Or even if they plan on getting it, they don't come to class with the textbook and they won't get it for the first couple of weeks. And in a course where you have somebody who is maybe in a more developmental math course, that's just one more chink against them succeeding in that course. I mean, we already work pretty hard to get those success rates up. And if you have a student that comes without the extra resource of having the book or access to the book, that can make it pretty difficult as well. So all of those things have kind of led us to using open educational resources. And also there's a lot of, especially in math, and I think there was a mention that STEM fields are a little bit further along in this, that there are choices. We have good materials to choose from, and so we don't have to make that compromise as much as others. Is this adequate or is this not? So we've been using, for the most part, My Open Math through Lumen Learning. We use that currently. That is in our college algebra and trig, so that would be your pre-calc sequence, as well as the Math for Liberal Arts. We've just converted that over. And we're looking to do Math 103, which is a more developmental math course, to push into there. So that would give access to students for nearly their entire developmental or their run-up sequence in math. That would give them a way to use an open educational resource. So they would have access to that textbook instantly, the very first day of class, which is a treat for all the instructors, because the number of times you get a student that comes up and says, my textbook is coming in on, and then they check their Amazon account and they see when it's coming in. It'd be great to have them have it on the first day, because we start on the first day. First day, there's homework. So let's see, what else did I have here for quick things to cover? So access to both financial and just physical access to the book. It just removes one barrier for students who aren't familiar with what it is to go to college. Do I need to have this book? Do I don't? When they finally figure out that they need the book, it might be too late for them in that course. So we're looking to have that help our success rates. And these are materials that can be used in a lot of different ways. Currently, I'm doing a flipped version of Math 103, and that flipped version, there's no reason I can't use an open educational resource as a book for that. And in fact, in some ways, that's going to open up, and you can use it in different ways. There's an online homework feature with My Open Math, which I won't use for homework, but I'll use as a pre-class assessment when they look at some of the other material before they come to class. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you use it, and it's nice to not, even if you're experimenting with it, it's nice to not think, well, I don't want to have the students pay $50 or $75 or $125, and I'm not really sure I'm going to use this. You can try it out, and it's at no charge to students, so you can feel like you can experiment a little bit too. I just want to mention one last thing, is that we have also put some effort into getting departmental support for this. And so on the College of Arts and Sciences is where the support comes from on our campus. So it's hard to, a lot of these courses, the lower division courses, a lot of those are, people rotate in through them, or will use adjuncts, or will have, you don't know when and how you're going to teach it. So to commit to an open educational resource, sometimes that is extra work for the instructor, at least because it's different. And the package doesn't necessarily come to you as neatly wrapped up as it does with a publisher's textbook that you're used to using. So we also created some resource guides for faculty so that they can quick start a course with, in this case, My Open Math, so that they can take advantage of all of the features, have that course loaded up. They don't have to do a lot of extra tinkering around to utilize the open educational resource. And I think that that's an important thing, because to set the expectation, and especially if you are hiring, let's say you're hiring an adjunct at the very last minute for a new section of this course, which is something that we do, then you can't expect them to suddenly create a course out of this jumble of content. And then when I say jumble, I say that affectionately. There's a lot of stuff available, and you can pick and curate what you're going to use. And so that ability to have that done and set up is, I think, also an important part of supporting open educational resources in a department.
Can I ask, Paul, so in the 200-300 level courses where you're using the textbook that's reverted, are you using any homework tools in those courses?
Those are both proof courses, and so homework tools are not commonly provided anywhere. Okay. Actually. The one thing I will say is that in the Math 301, I know that there are these video lectures, and so those could be part of things that you ask students to do. The other book I happen to know because I've also taught out of that course, and there are other resources that are available, but they're not necessarily linked to a homework system. Another course might have a homework system, but as we get to upper division, those homework systems drift off. They're less and less. I guess I'll also mention the software side of it, that we also have as an open educational resource. You can consider some of the free software. So currently our stats programs typically program in R, which is free to students. They can download it on their computers. We're looking at Octave, which is sort of a free version of MATLAB. And so these are also, Sage is another free math software. And so when students are asked to do their homework, and especially on a on a non-residential campus to think that they're going to come into the computer lab, sit down, and do their homework, any sort of programming homework that you have for them, is less reasonable. So if they can have free access to that software, whether it's R or Octave or any of the other ones, it also makes a difference for, I think, equity for STEM fields especially.
Hey, Paul, this is Brett and Everett. I'm going to jump in. I totally forgot to mention software. I'm really glad you did. For us in the Murrow College, that's been huge. Above and beyond textbooks, we do a lot of graphic design, audio, video editing, and so forth. And, initially using the Adobe Creative Suite with the licensing costs have just gotten more and more prohibitive for us and for our students. So we're embracing open source versions such as Audacity for audio editing, getpaint.net, which is a equivalent to Photoshop and so forth. And students have loved that because it saves them a significant amount of money. And very candidly, they can do the projects as we expect them to do successfully with those shareware versions. So I just throw that in. It's more than just books. The software has been part of what we've done as well.
So this is Rebecca, and I'll talk a little bit about what's happening at Washington State University. And one of the things I want to say first, Mike and I attended Open Education Conference last week, and one of the things I heard that I thought was of interest is that the cost of textbooks is increasing significantly, has been increasing significantly, much more quickly than tuition. But students are not spending more on textbooks because they are more and more frequently making these decisions to not purchase, maybe to share. There are options in terms of renting and used text, but oftentimes those are made more complicated by the online homework tools and the access codes that are required and the frequency with which publishers are updating their text. So it really is the cost of course materials really is a student retention, student success issue, which is one of the things that is of concern to the administration here at WSU. Last spring, or fall, actually I'm not exactly sure when, the students approached Interim President Bernardo with concerns about the cost of course materials. It is their number one issue, and it's an issue for students statewide and nationally. They're approaching legislators. Legislators in various states are looking at ways that they can create laws that will help to reduce the cost of course materials. And so the president put together a task force to look at the issue. We looked at a number of different things that could be done to decrease the cost of course materials for students, and open education resources is just one piece of that. So oftentimes when I'm talking about OERs, people start talking to me about the cost of quick response systems or issues with bookie policies that maybe don't really advantage the students. We are looking across all of those things. We have an ongoing steering committee that it consists of faculty, tech support folks, faculty senate representations, and students, and we're all talking about these things and where is the money being spent and where are the concerns. So OERs is just a part of that, but we are really actively engaged system-wide in trying to increase the adoption of open educational resources. So there's a couple of grant initiatives I wanted to make sure people are aware of, and if you go to teach.wsu.edu/OER, or if you just go to teach.wsu.edu, on the left-hand side, there's a link to the OER page. So in January, on January 26th, we'll have representatives from the Open Textbook Network here, OTN. They'll be doing a workshop for faculty on reviewing online open textbooks. And then if you are interested in participating in that workshop and doing a review, there will be $250 grant stipends. So there's an application online that you can access from the OER page. There's also will be a follow-up to that. So if you review and find a textbook you might be interested in, we know that then adapting, redesigning your course is going to be a task, and so there will be funding for people to apply to redesign their classes around open educational resources. Additionally, we have kind of a committee together with Mike Caulfield, myself, representatives from the library, our instructional designer Theron DeRosier. we want to be a support team for you, for any faculty who are looking at adopting open education resources. I mean, one of the real advantages of these tools is that you can fully, completely, totally customize it to meet your exact needs for your course. It's not like just picking an OpenStax text. You can pick that OpenStax text. We can work with Lumen or with others to put that into a platform where it's very easy to take chapters out, to bring chapters in from other sources, to add a video. There, you can customize them to be exactly what you need to teach your Washington State University class. And then you can make that open for other people who might want to teach in the same way. So I did just want to bring up those pieces. Is there anything I'm missing, Mike?
No, that's I feel like that's the scope of the thing between everybody. I mean, I do think we focused here on just 2 subjects, and of course, some people have more difficult subjects, right? I mean, nursing is an area I've looked at, and it's hard to find anything there, because a lot of those topics are just niche enough that they haven't been tackled yet. But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. There are ways to go about it.
I know that Renee and I have talked about the management course and how we can move that to be textbook versus a purchased one because of cost. So I will be talking to her about this, about the possibility of maybe developing something.
And that's a good point. Is often like you might have a set of courses and there's not necessarily a great resource for each one, but management is an area where there's a lot of management material out there that sometimes only needs minor customization, because you'll have something that almost fits and it'll be out there, and we can help and work with you to make it fit if there's something close.
I will talk to her about that.
It'd be great.
I was definitely looking for open access resources while you guys were talking.
Yeah.
That's what I've been typing for.
Yeah.
For neuroscience, there's pretty much nothing.
Yeah.
At least that's what I'm finding from the last really 40 minutes of using this time to listen to you guys and at the same time try to actively find things.
Yeah.
And I have a couple of things that could fit in, plug in, hey, we could use this for this week of class, but I didn't find anything that would then allow us to get rid of the textbook.
So one thing I'll say is, like, we look now at some of the resources we have, like the existence of an anatomy and physiology book, for example. That didn't exist 3 years ago. That didn't exist. There was no resource on anatomy and physiology. And I think 3 years from now, the landscape will be very different still.
Right.
So we can definitely. Sorry.
Well, I'd also be interested in knowing your search strategy.
Yeah.
My search strategy started with some websites that then link to other websites that have catalogs of open access resources. So Open Textbook Catalog, University of Minnesota, Open Textbooks via Merlot, some other sites, as well as individual keyword searches.
Yeah, I can see her screen from here. She actually is apparently a very effective searcher because she went directly to OTN.
Okay.
Which is a great resource.
One thing though, I mean, I was just gonna say, and again, this is thinking about it from math because we have so many books and so many things that are available. But it's also worth just maybe holistically trying to, as a university, think about what to target. Yeah. If I look at the math curriculum and I think about an engineering student, when they buy that calculus book that they have, they actually get that for a year and a half. So that investment, whether they're rented or they're shared or however they're doing it, is over 3 semesters. We don't switch books in midstream. Yeah. So meanwhile, looking at like Math 105, we look at that book and think, okay, this is a one-time expense. This is not a treasured textbook they're going to hang on to forever. So that's a great one to replace. So I think there's a good way to target. Maybe a neuroscience book is not the first one to look for.
And that's probably true because neuroscience, there's one textbook that everybody uses, and we use it for I think 3 of the 4 neuro courses we offer.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
right. And if they're going to go on to graduate school or anything like that, they will be expected at this point to have that textbook. That may change in a few years. One thing, and then I actually have to go administer this test. So you were talking about resources for helping faculty, and I think this was mentioned over there as well about funds available to help faculty to transition courses to online resources and things like that. One of the points I've tried to make in the surveys, and I might be in the minority here, or it's probably just a pipe dream, is it's not that I could use funds to help transition a course. I need time.
Yeah.
And time is not going to happen because my priority is running my research lab.
Yeah. And
So what I need is help. It's like a person who could come in and say, hey,
Yeah.
I have experience flipping a course
Yeah.
of this general type, could sit in on a course for a semester and then work with us to actually figure out how do we convert this to a hybrid, a specialist that could actually team with a faculty
Yeah, yeah.
member.
And we've heard that loud and clear, that time is the issue. And,
Yeah.
and one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to retarget some of our resources away from a pure support model, like walk in and we'll help you fix X, Y, and Z, to some of these larger projects where if someone wants to do something much larger in scale, we can take Adam, right, and he can help with the construction of this course. We can get a graduate student that can maybe write, now I'm talking big, but the idea is to find a group or team of people that can actually, either internally or externally, that can help with this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that would be ideal, and not just somebody with a technical experience, but somebody with some of the content knowledge.
Yeah,
I realize
with the
that
content
requires a lot more
knowledge.
expertise,
Yeah.
so that would be external partnerships.
Yeah.
To say, hey, we've successfully flipped some of these classes. We're going to
Yeah.
come in, observe what you're doing, and
Yeah.
work with you to modify the course in a way that it could be hybrid, it could be flipped,
Yeah.
it could use more online resources, but at the same time, it's not just incumbent upon the faculty.
Right, and maybe, course releases are, that's, I hesitate
Yeah.
to say the word, but really, in some ways, it's a one-time investment. And, I liked your example that you had in a previous discussion about, intro to chemistry, and what money is being funneled to the publisher
Yeah.
for the homework system. And if we just grab that money back and invested it into the courses,
Yeah.
with our own, then it's and that's a one-time investment. That's a huge savings for students, and in fact, doesn't have to necessarily cost you a lot of money. So, and that's the time thing, right? Because you're absolutely right. That's why we had support and had a quick start guide, because you can't expect every faculty member to oh, you're going to teach this course, and I'm asking you to invest this extra amount of time into making sure it can run with an OER. You want to make it so that they can drop into that course like they would drop into any course.
Yeah, and I've heard so much this idea, and I want to keep you from your class, but I've heard so much too this idea that people willing to change their course, but not even wanting a course release, because they need to teach a course, they need to do their research, right? They're on a track to get that
Be
done,
honest, if
right?
you give me course release, I'm going to write more grants.
Exactly,
I'll be perfectly
right.
honest.
But they want to be involved, but they need someone that brings in, the idea of pedagogical content knowledge is a way we think of teaching now. Is content pedagogical knowledge that is within a domain,
Exactly.
and that seems to be a broadly shared.
Yeah. I mean, really what I'm looking for, and I think a lot of us are collaborators.
Yeah.
Right. We collaborate in research and bring in people with different areas of expertise to come together, and I think that's what we're looking for in the classroom as well.
Okay.
But speaking of, they have an exam. And
All right.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Well, I guess if there's no other questions. Oh, wait.
One more question. Yeah.
I was just wondering about where to search for stuff. Is there a list
So
or?
actually, what we're trying to do is to get faculty to initially work with a librarian on each of the campuses who's been trained in the spots to go to, partially because what we've done in the past is send faculty out to the internet. It's just utterly depressed them. So on this campus, that person would be Linda Fredrickson. And you could talk to Linda Fredrickson and say, could you make a first pass and find some materials? And maybe she'll find the perfect one, maybe she won't, but it's a way to get started without being sort of overwhelmed with the lower quality materials that sometimes float to the top of the results. And if it doesn't work for you, then we'll go from there. And on other campuses, there's other people. Talia, I know, works with people on the Pullman campus.
And AOI could also help with that. Theron DeRosier can do searching for content, so if you're not sure on your campus who to contact. And again, on that OER page, there's some resources and a link to a library guide that Talia Anderson set up that has a number of some of the more common places, Open Text Network, OpenStax, and University of British Columbia Open Initiative are three pretty big ones. Okay.
Thanks.
So we will break for lunch now. I'm sorry I could not supply lunch on all of the campuses, but, and we will resume back at 1 o'clock with more from Phil Mixter and the kinds of things that Willie was talking about, on really using technology to engage students. We'll hear from some of the vet med faculty here on the Pullman campus, so I hope you'll come back. And thank you to Brett, Mike, Paul, for this OER presentation.